Good morning, Will. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, Arrow. So good to talk with you.
Dude, I got to tell you, we've needed this book. You get tired of going to Google or Yahoo or Bing, trying to find out information about people. With this book, Lou Reed, The King of New York, finally I've got something I can have in my own hands.
Well, thank you. I wanted to try and balance making a reference book that had all the information that any Lou Reed, Velvet Underground freak could want, but also have it be, a readable narrative. And his life story is fascinating. So hopefully I balance those two things.
But one of the biggest strengths that you've got is that it feels like it's happening right now. In other words, the way that you give it to the reader, it's like, wow. And then you go and I kept finding myself jumping onto YouTube to go listen to this song or to go do this kind of thing. I mean, you give us a continuation here.
Oh, good. That was the idea, really. I mean, so much of my career as a writer has really just been to turn people on to great music that, makes me feel good. And so I'm kind of spreading it. But yeah, I put in a lot of detail. I put in a lot of description of music. Lou Reed was a guy who was very famous without having a whole lot of his music played on the radio, though there are the signature songs. So I really wanted to show people the breadth of how much great work he did, besides Walk on the Wild Side and Sweet Jane, which, of course, are irrefutable classics.
That's interesting that you bring up Walk on the Wild Side, because that seems to be the only song that most people know. And I wish that people would jump on Alexa or go to iHeartRadio, put in Lou's name, and really take a journey.
Yeah, and especially the Velvet Underground, because, like a lot of artists, a lot of musicians, they do an incredible amount of their greatest work, not all of it, but a lot of it when they're young. And Lou Reed started with a group called the Velvet Underground, which came up alongside the Beatles, the Grateful Dead, like every classic rock band you could imagine. But they just never got the fame. They never had the hit singles. There were a variety of reasons for that, not because of the quality of the music so much, but bad production, and also, dealing with topics that didn't quite pass muster with the broadcast radio gatekeepers of the day. Walk on the Wild Side being the exception when he went solo, which also deals with stuff that didn't wind up on the radio a lot. But that one broke through for a variety of reasons. So I hope people check out the Velvet Underground first and foremost, because a lot of his great work was done with them.
Well, you being associated with Rolling Stone magazine, I mean, you know how the mystique of music and the bands were back then. I mean, look at Led Zeppelin that went through the same thing. We didn't know everything about the band, and I think that's part of the reason why I bought the magazines and got to know the Velvet Underground in the way of going, this is mine. I'm going to call this mine.
Yep, sure. And I grew up with Rolling Stone, and I bought those magazines. This is pre-internet. You couldn't find out about these bands anywhere else other than the music press. The Rolling Stone operation was the most high-profile one, and then there were a lot of smaller magazines. But that's where we had to go, right? Yeah.
Yeah, one of the fascinating things here, I didn't know that he had a collaboration with Andy Warhol. I'm a freak on Andy Warhol because I wanted to know his inside mind and the way that he thought. He was such a numbers guy. Everything was all based on numbers. Did he teach any of that language to Lou Reed, or how did they swap things out?
Oh, they were really tight for a period of time, and even when they sort of had a falling out, they stayed in touch. And Andy was kind of a mentor to Reed. He was about 10 years older, and he was a pop artist. Obviously, he was a painter and a great conceptual art dude, but he wanted to get into multimedia. Nowadays, every visual artist, like, they're making films and they're, doing performance art, all this stuff. But Warhol was one of the first, really, a pioneer in deciding, hey, I'm a visual artist, I'm a painter, but I want to make films. Yeah. So, and I want to do light shows, and I want to do other stuff. And but I need a rock band. So he went to see the Velvet Underground when they were playing in a dinky little coffee house in Lower Manhattan. And he was like, okay, this is a band that's singing about some interesting stuff. They had a viola player, Cale, who was a very sophisticated classical music composer and instrumentalist who was into making a lot of noise. He was into making noisy classical music. And Andy was like perfect band for my multimedia project, which became known as the Exploding Plastic Inevitable. Very 60s name. And that was the Velvet Underground traveling around the country with Andy Warhol, and they were doing light shows. Some of the original light shows, there's a lot of argument as to whether the light shows that came out of the psychedelic scene in San Francisco in the 60s were not introduced to them by the Velvet Underground, who played the Fillmore. They were one of the first bands to play there. Wow. So yeah, and Lou and Andy stayed friends throughout the years. And when Andy Warhol died, Lou did a beautiful tribute album with John Cale called Songs for Drella.
See, this is every bit the reason why we need books like this, because, I mean, as we continue to grow forward with music, we can't lose the history. And I know that a millennial or even Generation Z is going to come through and you know, they're going to go, what is this book? They're going to read it, and then it's going to introduce themselves to something new. I love it when the younger people listen to the older music, because I didn't have that as a kid. I had only our music. Everybody today can have our music. We share it all as one.
Right. The joy of the internet, I mean, there's a curse to it also, but the joy is that the entire history of recorded music pretty much is out there if you want to look. And the kids who are getting a whole bunch of young artists alongside of the elders can tap into this, make connections. And I'm still a working journalist. I love writing about new bands. I love discovering new bands. And writing this book, it was really important to me to connect, like, why should I care about Lou Reed in 2023 if I'm like, a 20-year-old college rock fan? I tried to make those connections.
Yeah, because I mean, a lot of these new bands, because I love talking to them too, because man, they're dreamers and they've got that ambition to make it big. And then when they bring up a name like Lou Reed, you're going, how the hell did you know that? You're not even old enough for that. But then you realize they study the art and the history of music as well.
Right. And Lou Reed aimed high. Yeah. Like, did he always make great music? No. I mean, you're an artist. You have successes. You have failures. You have stuff that's kind of meh. But he was always aiming high. He went to school and studied with Delmore Schwartz, who was one of the great American poets. And he aspired to be a poet in his song lyrics. And he also aspired to be a storyteller. And Walk on the Wild Side certainly is kind of like a telescoped play or short story. And I think any songwriter working in rock that wants to tell a narrative story has got to look at what Lou Reed did, because he really laid the groundwork.
Let's talk about that poetic side of Lou Reed, because I know what it's like to go into the studio with your poetry about ready to be laid down on the tracks. But the thing is, though, is that when the engineer looks at you and says, I'm not feeling it, you've got to rework your words. Did Lou have to go through that kind of it's painful that when you, because it's like, this is my art, this is my poetry, and then it doesn't match with what's going on with the music.
Well, it's funny because Lou Reed was a guy who, and Laurie Anderson talked about Lou and how he was the kind of writer that he'd wake up and he'd write a song and it would be complete with no crossouts on the page. Yeah. And it's I'll go through lyrics for, weeks, months trying to get them just right. And Lou, it just sort of comes out fully formed. But if you listen to, some of his greatest songs, that he did with the Velvet Underground, there are multiple recorded versions, and sometimes the lyrics are radically different. Yep. And that's exciting. There's an album called Velvet Underground Live 1969, and that has some songs like Sweet Jane and New Age. I think Rock and Roll is on there too, that became very famous in later versions on Rock and Roll Animal and on the final Velvet Underground album, Loaded. But the lyrics are totally different, so that's kind of neat.
Dude, I can so relate with that, with the idea of the way that he did that with the different versions what I would do is I would put the title of the song and then I would put chapter 1. Then I'd re-record it chapter 2. And then we would all sit down and listen to it inside the room because we go, okay, which version of this do you like? Because it doesn't stop. A song evolves and you've just got to be present for it.
Right, because different things happen when it meshes with music. And of course, if you're working in a band, then every member is going to bring something different and maybe unforeseen to the mix. That's part of the magic, but it also means that you have to pivot to make that work.
I know that you're a journalist, but now you're also a book author. Do they get along with each other? Because those are two different personalities.
They are two different personalities. And, one is immediate gratification. I have a deadline. And you have a deadline that's like right in your face. It's just like, dude, I need this on Friday. You got to give it up Friday. So, you write it fast, you get it out there, it's posted, you get the satisfaction of having closure. Writing a book is a totally different beast, but it gives you the time, which as a journalist, I don't always have the time. And in fact, in the internet era, less and less time between deciding to write a piece, being asked to write a piece, and having to put the piece out there. This book, I knew I wanted to write it. I've been a Lou Reed and Velvet Underground fan for most of my conscious life. I knew that I was going to take time to do this right. And, it took the better part of 10 years. I started this back in late 2013. Yeah. So here we are.
Yeah, I'm glad you explained it that way because I was going to ask you, please don't give us a 2-hour documentary on Hulu. Give us a 9-part series that we can binge watch with something like this because I want to have enough air to breathe so I can take it all in.
I hope so. I mean, from your voice to the producer's ears that haven't contacted me yet. But that is now a thing. That wasn't really a thing even 10 years ago. I mean, the idea of like a multi-part documentary. But now that's kind of the coin of the realm with streaming and such. So, I'm excited at the prospect.
You write in a way that makes it sound like that you've been best friends or you've been a really good friend with Lou Reed on this, because it sounds like that Lou spoke to you and you're going, by the way, I had a conversation yesterday with Lou Reed. Here's what was going on.
Well, I didn't really. I mean, I met him a few times. Yeah. I interviewed him. And he is, he's just such a New York figure. I grew up in New York. I spent most of my life in New York. I certainly know a lot of people in his sphere. And I spoke to them and I really tried to root the book in his words because, there's a lot of stuff that's been written about Lou Reed. A lot of it's not true. A lot of it is stuff that he said about himself that was untrue, which doesn't help matters in terms of trying to get the story straight. But he was a character, and, I just really tried to talk to everybody who is still alive, and may they rest in peace. A lot of the people I spoke to are no longer alive, right. But I'm glad to have gotten a chance to speak to the great Hal Wilner, to speak to Billy Name, who was Andy Warhol's kind of very close friend and right-hand man back in the 60s factory days, and Holly Woodlawn, and wow. A lot of other people. So.
Wow, I think that's one of the toughest things about being a fan of music for as many years as I've been in radio. And the thing is that it's like those that are gone, they're still a part of us. And it's like when we speak of them not being here, it's like, well, no, I have this book. They're here, and it's like their presence still lives inside each of us that were fans.
Right. You have the recordings. Yes. You have the emotions that you felt when you first heard the recordings back when you were a teenager or in college or when you met your first, wife or husband, what have you. And, Lou Reed came up in an era where there wasn't a lot, like the Velvet Underground, there weren't a lot of interviews, a lot of documentary material, right, but exactly. There was some, and it's out there now with the internet. You can listen to a lot of early early interviews. There's some film clips out there. It's very dodgy video from the mid-'70s. And, I tried to use all of that for research material, too. So hopefully if people want to go down the rabbit hole, they can find, Lou Reed performing in Australia in 1974, giving a very cantankerous press conference at the Sydney airport. It's quite entertaining. You can lose a day.
Now, one thing that I've never found with Lou Reed, and I would love to find out why it didn't happen. Why am I not seeing him on American Bandstand? Why didn't I see him on an Ed Sullivan or a variety show like that?
Well, Lou Reed wrote about, some people would call it dirty realism. Yes. Like he really liked to look at, kind of the darker corners of life. And, and he would find beauty, in all over the place. But he didn't flinch from writing a song about heroin, which talked about, it didn't advocate doing heroin, but it tried to depict addiction and the appeal of that drug in the mind of somebody who used it. He wrote about S&M relationships in Venus and Furs. That was based on a book that was written in the 1800s. He wrote about violent scenarios, abusive scenarios, and that was not the kind of stuff that was going to fly on American Bandstand necessarily. It was not Summer of Love material when the Velvets were playing in the late 60s.
Which is so different from today, because today we just bleep it out of the song. It's like, okay, we know what this song is about. We're just going to bleep out the bad words.
Right. Yeah. Nowadays, all this stuff turns up in pop radio songs all the time. And, with satellite radio, the restrictions are even less in streaming. So. He was ahead of his time in a lot of ways.
What's your next book about? Who are you gonna get for us?
That's a good question. I'm kind of it took me a little while to land on Lou Reed after my first book, Love Goes to Buildings on Fire, which was about New York's music scene in the mid-'70s, about everybody from Bruce Springsteen to the New York Dolls and Patti Smith and television. So I'm gonna, I'll take a little time and hopefully I'll knock it out in less than 10 years with whatever the next project is.
Was there ever one of those moments, though? Because, you said that you started this in 2013. I'm also a book author, and I've been quoted to say many times that I'm not going to get that time back. In other words, you dedicated so much of your time into these pages, but everything else continued to move in the real world.
Yeah. I mean, you pivot, you update new material. Like, taking a lot of time has its pluses. Like there's a beautiful documentary that the director Todd Haynes put together called The Velvet Underground, and that just came out 2 years ago. So had I published earlier, I wouldn't have had the benefit of seeing that. A lot of things that were reissued, and a huge archive of Lou Reed's belongings, writings, recordings at the New York Public Library that was only made available back in 2019. So sometimes playing the long game is the way to go.
Where can people go to find out more about you and to really dive into your what you have brought to us as readers?
Oh, thank you for the opportunity. I've written for a whole lot of places. I started my career really full on in Minneapolis at a publication called City Pages. I jumped to Spin magazine and wrote. So the archives of Spin, there's a lot of my stuff. I jumped to Rolling Stone, did a lot of work with them. I've worked for National Public Radio, so there's audio material, and also the New York Times. I've been doing stuff for them because I'm a New York dude.
Well, you got to come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you.
Arrow, it's such a pleasure to talk to you, man, and I'd love to talk to you again. So have a great one.
You bet. You be brilliant today, okay, sir?
We try.
Yes, sir.
You
like
too,
Arrow
brother.
is. Like Arrow is.
Yeah, that's
yes,
Arrow's
man.
brilliant.
Have fun, you guys.
Take care.